You've ever scrolled social media and you're like, I don't even know why I'm doing this. It doesn't really feel that good. But also, there's this really interesting question now. If you block people or restrict people, people think that you're somehow afraid of the information.
Brace yourself for a harrowing journey into the depths of digital manipulation as Huberman uncovers the sinister techniques employed by social media platforms to hijack our attention, erode our privacy, and exploit our vulnerabilities.
I am truly glad that cell phones, the internet, and pornography did not exist when I was younger, because I don't know if at 14 I could have been disciplined enough if I had access to that. And when you think about the things that we're doing right now that are sort of that have maybe the most grand unintended consequences, where do you land?
Witness the unveiling of a digital dystopia as Huberman shines a searing light on the dark underbelly of social media, revealing the devastating impact it has on our mental health, relationships, and overall well-being.
Now think about an opposite situation. You go to the doctor's office and you're sitting in the doctor's lobby and you're waiting and there's no phone reception, so you can't scroll Instagram. You're waiting and you're waiting. It's incredibly boring. It's a very low dopamine state.
Prepare to confront the unsettling truth as Huberman exposes the corrosive effects of social media addiction, unveiling a world where validation is fleeting, the comparison is toxic, and authenticity is sacrificed at the altar of virtual popularity.
Yeah, on the timescale of 24 hours, one of the huge mistakes that we all make, and I've said this many times, so if people have heard me say this before, forgive me, but it turns out it's still true. Getting too much bright light exposure from the hours of 10 p.m. until 4 a.m., unless you have to work shift work, which is a unique case, that bright light exposure between 10 p.m. and 4 a.m., even if you adjust the colors of the lights, you still need to get everything really, really dim.
Embark on a bone-chilling exploration of the social media abyss as Huberman pulls back the curtain, revealing the manipulation, echo chambers, and fake personas that lurk beneath the glossy surface of curated profiles.
Just how triggering are our phones when it comes to dopamine?
Okay, great question. We often hear that, that social media getting dopamine hit after dopamine hit. When we first get on social media for the first time or after a long period of time, the amount of dopamine that's released, we think, is quite substantial.
Brace yourself for a heart-wrenching expose as Huberman delves into the psychological warfare waged by social media giants, exposing their insidious algorithms that prey on our insecurities and foster a never-ending cycle of dissatisfaction.
I think that if you look at any drug of abuse or any situation where somebody isn't motivated or thinks now, they may have clinically diagnosed attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, but a lot of what people think is ADHD, it turns out, is people just over-consuming dopamine from various sources. And also the context within a TikTok feed the context switch is insane. The brain has never seen, first of all, this is the first time in human evolution that we wrote with our thumbs, but that's a pretty benign shift. And then the other shift is, normally you walk from one room to another, or from a field into the trees, or from a hut or a house, or whatever it is. But now you can get 10,000 context switches in that 30 minutes of scrolling on Instagram or TikTok. And so it's all about self-regulation. We are going to select for the people that can self-regulate. And so then people say, well, how do you self-regulate? How do kids self-regulate? Well, this is my hope, and one of the reasons I've gotten excited about public education and teaching neuroscience is that this is a place where knowledge of knowledge actually can allow oneself to intervene. When you think, I'm feeling low, I don't feel good, nothing really feels like good. Am I depressed? Maybe, but maybe you've saturated the dopamine circuits. You're now in the pain part of things. What do? Well, you have to stop. You need to replenish dopamine. You need to stop engaging with this behavior, and then your pleasure for it will come back. But you have to constantly control the hinge. It's not just about being back and forth on the seesaw. You have to make sure the hinge doesn't get stuck in pain or in pleasure.
Witness the chilling reality of online disconnection as Huberman unravels the paradox of social media, revealing how it isolates us from genuine human connection, replacing meaningful interactions with superficial likes and empty scrolling.
So grief is a motivated state to bridge the distance in time and space, and yet it's impossible. And so the process of grief is a gradual waning of that motivation and a gradual shift of the memory of the person into some concept, whether or not it's a soul, whether or not it's just the past, whether or not it's their energy. Again, it depends on what the forebrain of that particular person believes. shifts that concept of that person into a place where the brain is comfortable. There's no more autonomic arousal. There's no motivation. And we've all experienced this. If you've had a loss, and I've had a loss, for instance, where my graduate advisor died and I adored her. And every once in a while, her daughter will call me from her cell phone, and she kept the same number on that phone and the name and everything. So every once in a while, it'll ring Barbara Chapman, and I'll reach for the phone, and then there's this moment where I'm like, oh, goodness. So anyway, I'm going on and on just to color this with example, but when there's a breakup, it's exceedingly hard, especially if the person is young. You know, if you look at after breakups, those are far more common in younger people than they are in older people. Why? Because the relationship represents the whole future. They have no concept that they know there are other people, but it sort of feels like the whole world is shutting down. So in breakups, what's happened is the person is no longer available in time and space. This is why when someone breaks up, you literally have to let them go, right? You know, constant pursuing of them is out of context, is not healthy. They have a name for that. It's called a stalker. Don't do it. But it's almost as if the brain has to think that the person is gone in time and space. This has become much harder with social media, right? Because people can check up on people, they can hear from people. In the old days, like when I was growing up, you just like took the phone off the hook, or you diverted your attention. Now we are constantly renewing that the person is still there. And so love and the loss of love and the death grief are virtually identical. It's that motivational state. And this is why it's so hard to not reach out to somebody that you really miss and want back. Well, this is the problem. We remember the rat experiment? They are effectively the rat with no dopamine, but they can still achieve some sense of pleasure by consuming excess calories, by consuming social media. And look, I'm not judging, I do this stuff too, right? Scrolling social media. If you've ever scrolled social media and you're like, I don't even know why I'm doing this. It doesn't really feel that good. And I can remember a time where you'd see something that was just so cool, or you'd see something online. I remember this when TED Talks first came out. I was like, this is amazing. These are some, at least some of them are really smart people sharing really cool insights. And then now that there are like a gazillion TED Talks, I remember spending a winter in my office when I was a junior professor, cleaning my office finally, and binging TED Talks in the background, thinking this is a good use of my time. Pretty soon, they all sucked to me. I was like, this isn't good. So what you need to do is stop watching TED Talks for a while, wait, and then they become interesting again. And that's this pain-pleasure balance. And so for people that aren't feeling motivated, the problem is they're not motivated, but they're getting just enough or excess sustenance. So they're getting the little mild hits of opioid. It becomes an opioid system. And if you think about the opioid drugs as opposed to dopaminergic drugs make people rabid for everything. You know, of abuse like cocaine and amphetamine make people incredibly outward directed, right? They hardly notice anything except what they want more of, more. It's bad because those trigger so much dopamine release that they become the reward. It's very circular. Only the drug can give that much dopamine. Nothing they could pursue would give them as much dopamine as the drug itself. So there's that. And then there's the kind of opioid-like effects of constantly indulging oneself with social media or with video games or with food or with anything, to the point where it no longer evokes the motivation and craving. And this is really the new evolution of the understanding of dopamine in neuroscience, which is that dopamine itself is not the reward. It's the buildup to the reward. But also, you know, there's this really interesting question now. If you block people or restrict people, people think that you're somehow afraid of the information that they're posting, but that's often not the case. I'm not in the habit of blocking or restricting too many people. Occasionally we've had to do it only because of how other people are being treated in the comment section. What I can take and what I think other people deserve to take are two completely different things. David Goggins, right, who we both know well, I don't know if he still does this, but a few years ago he posted something like, if people ask him, when do you sleep? He would just block them. Yeah. Because it wasn't consistent with what he was trying to say. Of course he sleeps, but it's, you know, he's trying to get a particular message out. I think people should just understand that everybody's page is their own to moderate.